Breaking news. After the Wagner mutiny, Kyiv reorganized the army. The blog is no longer active. It's great to have you here today. On Friday, June 30th, these were the developments in the war between Russia and Ukraine. Poland is concerned that a Wagner group in Belarus could cause instability in Europe. According to the Financial Times, Jacek Sawira, head of Poland's National Bureau of Security, said that the Wagner group, which has relocated to Belarus, could use people from Africa and other places where the paramilitary group operates to destabilize Central and Eastern Europe. A prominent Russian theater director has had his pre-trial detention extended. The pre-trial detention of a Russian theater director and playwright on charges of justifying terrorism has been extended. This is the latest development in Russia's crackdown on dissent, which has accelerated since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Zhenya Berkovich, a well-known independent theater director, and Svetlana Petrichuk, a well-known playwright, have been in detention since early May. On Friday, the court extended their incarceration until September 10. Finist, the Brave Falcon has been banned in Russia for allegedly justifying terrorism, a crime punishable by up to 7 years in prison. Russia generally prohibits the use of Polish cargo trucks, but there are a few exceptions. TASS. According to the Russian state news agency TASS, the Transport Ministry has banned, with some exceptions, Polish trucks from transporting cargo within Russia's borders. On Friday, the agency reported that the ministry had said its decree would not affect the transport of essential items like medicine and medical devices to the Baltic Kaliningrad enclave, U.S. Military chief says the country is considering sending cluster bombs to Ukraine. The highest-ranking American military officer has stated that the United States is considering sending cluster munitions to Ukraine. Submunitions, also known as bomblets, are released from such weapons, which explode mid-air and spread out over a wide area to damage multiple targets at once. According to Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Army General Mark Milley, for a long time, the United States has considered supplying the munitions. Other allies and humanitarian organizations would likely protest any decision to supply such weapons. The Supreme Court of Norway upheld an earlier ban on Russian drone flights over the country. The Norwegian Supreme Court has ruled that a ban on Russian flights over Norway, instituted in response to the war in Ukraine, also applies to drones. Andrei Yakunin, the son of a former close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, was acquitted last year of flying drones over Svalbard during a boat trip in the Arctic archipelago, but the decision handed down on Friday could lead to a retrial of him. While Norway is not a member of the European Union, it generally follows the policies of the EU. The largest gas exporter to Europe after the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline in the Baltic Sea, Norway increased security at energy installations and other high-value targets in response to the conflict in Ukraine. Ukrainian police say that 2 women were killed in a Russian missile attack in Donetsk. Ukrainian police say 2 women were killed and 6 others injured when Russian missiles struck a village school in the eastern Donetsk region. Ukrainian police said on Friday that a primary school teacher, 56, and a chief accountant, 44, were killed in the attack on the village of Serhivka. The prosecutor's office claimed that there were only 12 employees in the building. On Friday, students in Ukraine did not have class. According to the National Police of Ukraine, Russian troops, in a direct hit, destroyed a school where civilians were located. The prosecutor's office in the Donetsk region reported that 4 men, ages 54 to 69, and 2 women, ages 24 and 34, were injured in the attack and taken to the hospital. Russia. We will keep sending grain to the poorest countries even if the Black Sea deal isn't renewed. Despite Russian concerns about the future of the Black Sea grain deal with Ukraine after July 17, the country has assured developing nations that grain exports will continue as planned. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Friday that if the Black Sea Initiative were to ever cease operations, Russia would provide free, comparable, or larger grain deliveries to the world's poorest countries. The United Nations estimates that between 2018 and 2020, Africa will import $3.7 billion in wheat from Russia, 32% of total African wheat imports, and $1.4 billion from Ukraine, 12% of total African wheat imports. Ukrainian counterattacks are proceeding methodically. Brigadier General in the United States Army. According to U.S. Army General Mark Milley, the Ukrainian counteroffensive against Russian forces is going slower than people had predicted, but is nonetheless making steady progress. It's moving more slowly than expected. That, Milley told the National Press Club on a Friday, doesn't surprise me. It is making slow but sure progress through extremely hazardous minefields, etc. Since June 26, no ships have been registered for the Black Sea grain export deal. UN. The United Nations is worried because no new ships have been registered since June 26 under the agreement that ensures the safe export of grain from Ukraine via the Black Sea. UN spokesman Farhan Haq told reporters on Friday, "We call on the parties to commit to the continuation and effective implementation of the agreement without further delay." For its reputation in Latin America, Ukraine is hoping that Spain will assume the EU presidency. President Volodymyr Zelensky has told Spanish media that Ukraine hopes to use Spain's rotating EU presidency to try to gain influence in Latin America, where several countries have opposed Kyiv's efforts to retake territory occupied by Russia. On the eve of Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's visit, Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseny Zelensky claimed several countries had prevented him from attending an EU Latin American summit in Brussels on July 17 to 18. "We've got a formula for peace, and Pedro's been a big help. He is in constant communication with Latin American leaders, and they pay attention to what he has to say." His remarks from Kyiv were broadcast on state TVE, but I'll say frankly that some Latin American countries are blocking the decision and this invitation, he said. "I hope they will join the peace formula and also take a firm stance against war," he said. When Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said earlier this year that the West had been encouraging war by arming Ukraine, he enraged many Western countries. The Russian government has issued a decree increasing military pay. A decree posted on the government website shows that starting on October 1, military salaries in Russia will increase by 10.5%. This comes days after the Wagner Group, a band of mercenaries, attempted and failed to seize control of the city of Rostov-on-Don in southern Russia before marching on Moscow with guns blazing. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the group's leader, explained the unexpected action by saying it was a statement against the inefficiency and corruption of Russia's highest officials. The northern defenses of Ukraine should be bolstered for safety's sake. General Ukraine has taken measures to strengthen its border defenses with Belarus, a close ally of Russia, after driving Russian forces out of northern regions last year. Northern Group of Forces Commander General Serhiy Naev stated, "Right now, there is no direct threat of offensive actions from Belarus and Russia in the zone that is the responsibility of the Northern Group of Forces. A growing threat," he warned, necessitated steps to bolster Ukraine's defense capabilities, and he added, "Our intelligence does not stop working to obtain information." Modi calls for more talks and diplomacy to resolve the Wagner mutiny. The situation in Ukraine and Moscow's handling of an armed mercenary mutiny were on Putin's and Modi's agenda during their meeting, the Kremlin and New Delhi have said. The Indian government said in a statement on Friday that Prime Minister Narendra Modi had reiterated his call for dialogue and diplomacy, while discussing the situation in Ukraine. Wagner mercenary group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin shocked the world on Saturday by leading an armed revolt, only to call it off as his troops neared Moscow. A journalist in Belarus was jailed as part of the government's crackdown on the press. A journalist in Belarus was found guilty of aiding extremist activities, and given a 4-year prison term as part of the government's ongoing crackdown on the opposition and independent journalists that has intensified since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Pavel Padobed's trial was conducted in secret. The Belarusian Journalists' Union covered his Friday conviction and sentence. Padobed collaborated with Belsat, a satellite channel funded by Poland that airs in Belarus and is deemed extremist media by the Belarusian government. After being re-elected in an election widely regarded as fraudulent in 2020, mass protests swept the country, and President Alexander Lukashenko has become increasingly repressive towards the opposition and independent journalists. From January to May, Ukraine's current account deficit was $1.43 billion. Ukraine's current account deficit was $1.43 billion in the first 5 months of the year, according to data from the country's central bank. Ukraine's current account surplus was $3.07 billion in the same period last year. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, which started in February 2022, has dealt a severe blow to the country's export-based economy due to the decline in shipments.